On Wednesday, the 11th of May 1994, Philomena Gillane, 41, was 7 months pregnant on her second child. She left her home at Kaltra, County Galway, early to go to work, but she never arrived. She would eventually be found in the boot of her car, 25 miles away in Athlone train station. Her family would spend the next 3 years in and out of courts, dealing with the fallout from her brutal murder, and in a search for justice that was never fully achieved. Kaltra is a small village and townland in County Galway. It is situated on the road from Tuam to Ballinasloe and has 4 fairs which are held each year. Philomena, her husband Pat, and their 9-month-old son lived in the childhood home of Philomena, along with her mother Noni, who was a widow, her older sister Bridie, and a brother. The house was called Beach Lawns, and it was an old farmhouse with no running water, no phone, or any modern conveniences. The stay here for Philomena and her little family was only to be short-term, as herself and Pat were in the process of building a large house on the land that Pat owned. Pat was from Gort, County Galway, and he and his brother had inherited an 80-acre farm from their parents, which was divided equally between them. By May 1994, the house was just about finished, and Philomena was setting about picking carpets, paint and furnishings for it. Pat worked in a factory and also worked for a time as a truck driver, so he definitely wasn't short of a few bob. Philomena wasn't short of money either. She worked as a cook in the hospital in Loughlinstown in Dublin and had been working there for 20 years. She would often stay at the hospital in the provided accommodation, as she worked 1 week on and 1 week off. She was great for squirreling away money. She paid the £65,000 it cost to build their home in Gort, which she paid for in cash, and also still had money left over to furnish the house how she wanted it. Philomena was fun, easygoing and well liked, but definitely no fool. Philomena and Pat had met in the seaside village of Fanner, County Clare. It was September 1990 and they were both at the nearby Listonvarna matchmaking festival. He had seen her once before at the bar and they danced together all night in Fanner. He was 28 and she was 10 years older and involved with another man. He gave her his sister's phone number written on the back of a matchbox, as he did not have a phone. Pat probably looked like a good match that night in Fenner. One of 2 brothers who had just inherited the family farm. He was a nifty dresser with a good line in chat. He also regarded himself as a lady killer. He always believed he was totally attractive to women. Philomena obviously fell for his charms and would ring him a few times the following week. They ended up meeting a month later at a country and western night in Kiltormer village, County Galway. 3 years later, Philomena, who was by now 5 months pregnant, married Pat at Knock, County Mayo. It was a very small wedding with only about 6 people attending. But all was not what it seemed. It never is. Sometime in 1992, Pat would meet Philomena's older sister, Bridie, when he came to collect Philomena to take her to a wedding. Sometime after that, Bridie and Pat would start a relationship behind Philomena's back. He would take Bridie to the Rose of Tralee Festival in County Kerry, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. If not, basically it's a beauty contest, or as we'd call it, an excuse for a drinking session. 5 months after Philomena and Pat got married in 1993, he also took Bridie to the matchmaking festival in Listonvarna, which is where he first met his wife. This man definitely had no scruples. So basically, they were all living under the one roof, and Pat was sleeping with the 2 sisters, and it would later come out that Noni, the mother, knew about the affair. Ugh, give me strength. On Wednesday, the 10th of May 1994, Pat and Philomena were out for a night in the local pub. The next morning, Philomena got up early to head to Dublin to start her week of work. She left the yard around 6:40 a.m. in her maroon-coloured Opel Kadett to start her journey, but she never arrived. By Friday, her colleagues were worried. Before then, they had been slack in their worry, as she was 7 months pregnant and it was policy in the hospital that you could take 2 days off without notice. As the hospital had no telephone number for Philomena, they wrote to her home address inquiring about her. On the Sunday, Pat rang the hospital in Loughlinstown, as arranged with Philomena before she left, and they informed him that she had not arrived to work on the Wednesday morning, days before. On hearing the news, Pat rang the local Garda station to report her missing. An alert was immediately issued by Gardaí that Sunday evening. Searches were made around her home place, and locals were interviewed. Because Philomena was 7 months pregnant, soon the local and national newspapers got a hold of the story, and so a nationwide search was on, looking for a 5'5" pregnant woman with short dark hair and green eyes. The Gordons were a very private family, so private that the neighbours didn't even know that Philomena had gotten married and was pregnant on her second child. People didn't even know that she was married to Pat Gillane. They thought it was Bridie and Pat that were seeing each other, as when Philomena was away in Dublin working for the week, they were seen out in the local pub together. On Tuesday, the 17th of May, a man came forward telling the Gardaí that on the morning Philomena was last seen, he heard gunshots going off in the area. Philomena's mother and sister would eventually confirm that they had heard shots also, but thought nothing of it because of living in the country, and it would be a common occurrence. On the morning of the 18th of May, a week after Philomena disappeared, her car was located at the Athlone train station 25 miles from her home. When the Gardaí arrived and examined the car, they noticed the keys in the ignition, and the car looked like it had been rifled through. To further inspect the car, a Garda took the keys from the ignition and used them to open the boot, or trunk as some might say, and there lay Philomena inside, dead. Staff at the station could not say how long the car was there, and it was well before the time of CCTV. The car was cordoned off and a bus was parked behind the car to block onlookers and media. The state pathologist arrived and examined Philomena's body at the scene. The car was removed for forensic examination. The body was taken to the hospital for a post-mortem, and it was realised that Philomena had bruising on her forehead, as well as abrasions on her hands and knees. It was also discovered that Philomena was shot in the back of the head with a shotgun, and there were 6 stab wounds to her back. The pathologist concluded that Philomena died from internal bleeding and shock, and she was most likely alive up to 20 minutes after she was shot, but the stabbings that she received afterwards would have made sure of her death before she was put in the boot of the car. It was also reported that she died not long after leaving her home. This was now a murder inquiry, and the Gardaí went searching her home place again, and there they would find a spent cartridge. Upon examination, though, they determined that it was an old one. The Gardaí believed that Philomena fled from her attackers, as it was said she was shot from a distance of 10 to 12 feet. The poor woman must have been terrified. Shooting her was unsuccessful, so when they caught up with her, she was then stabbed. Whoever did this were definitely determined in killing Philomena. Gardaí believed that there were 2 attackers, as she was so heavily pregnant that it would take 2 people to carry her and put her in the car. This murder happened only 2 weeks after the murders of Imelda Riney and her son Liam and Father Joe Walsh in Clare and Galway, respectively. As Garda inquiries were continuing in Galway, so too were Gardaí searching Philomena's room, where she stayed when she was working at the hospital, and they also interviewed staff that worked with her. The staff would say she was the heart and soul of the workplace. They held a special mass the day after Philomena was found, in memory of her. On the evening of the 20th of May, Philomena's body was taken to the local church in Kaltra. People lined up to express their condolences to the family. The funeral took place the following day, where Philomena had been christened. After the funeral, Pat Gillane moved back to Gort with his son to live with his brother Kevin. By Monday, the 23rd of May, Gardaí widened their search around the home place and stated they had no confirmed sighting of Philomena after leaving her home. Gardaí did receive information about two men being seen in the area of the house that morning and appealed for them to come forward, but they hadn't up to then. Another man they appealed to come forward had been at Athlone train station, who noticed Philomena's car and had gone to staff at the station to say the car door was open. He did come forward and he was ruled out of the inquiry, as the car he had reported to staff at the station was not Philomena's car. Eventually a man would be arrested and brought to Ballinasloe Garda station, and on the same evening a woman was arrested also in connection with Philomena's murder. 2 days later, on the 25th of May, a third person was arrested. That day, Gardaí also revealed that a 6-inch knife was also recovered after being found by a passerby near Philomena's home. This knife, among other evidence, was taken to be forensically examined, but they couldn't prove that they were conclusively connected to the murder. On the 26th of May, the man and the woman had been detained, were released. Gardaí sources would release information also that Philomena had been found fully dressed, but was still wearing her nightdress under her clothes and had been fully covered over by her coat in the boot of the car. 2 months after the murder, a man was detained. This man was then released after the maximum of 48 hours. There were several reports in the newspapers on the case, including that an attempt on Philomena's life was made previously, but Gardaí would not confirm this. By August, extra Gardaí were brought in to work on the case, quashing rumours that the investigation was being scaled back. The area where Philomena was attacked was still not identified, but they thought that it was near her home. Gardaí thought it was possible that the shotgun used in the killing may have been loaned out to the killer unknowingly, and appealed to anyone who may have done this to come forward. Pat Gillane gave an interview to the newspaper, saying how much he missed his wife, but Pat wouldn't come to the door when the journalist Veronica Gillane came to interview him. His brother would tell Miss Gillane that Pat was shy of women. That day, Veronica Gillane wrote a piece in the newspaper stating that Pat Gillane was not aware that Crimeline were to do a piece on his wife's murder and wasn't even asked to take part in the programme. More shockingly, Miss Gillane reported that Gardaí had spoken to a woman 2 months beforehand. She stated that this woman had come forward and told them that a man she was seeing at the time confessed to killing Philomena. Miss Gillane the following week would publish another article in the newspaper, an actual interview with the woman who had gone to the Gardaí. She stated that she had gone to the Gardaí with the information about this man she was seeing, who she said had told her he had killed Philomena. But because of the stress and confusion over the whole thing, it caused a breakdown in her relationship with the man she was living with. So she gave a false name and told lies to the Gardaí, and so she became unreliable, and they couldn't bring the case any further with her information. By September 1994, Gardaí reported that they had increased surveillance on 3 men they suspected of carrying out the killing. On the 14th of June 1995, Gardaí were called to the house of Pat Gillane over a disturbance there. A fight had broken out between 4 men. 2 of the men were Philomena's brothers and the other 2 were Pat and Kevin Gillane. Philomena's brothers were treated in hospital for their injuries, one of them having to receive surgery for his wounds. It also emerged that Philomena's mother and sister had also been in Gort that evening, visiting the grave of Philomena, and were also at Pat Gillane's house when the incident occurred. After this incident, the Gardaí prepared a file for the DPP in order to press charges. On the 2nd of July 1995, 2 men appeared at a special sitting of the District Court. Kevin Gillane was charged with grievous bodily harm for the incident, and Pat Gillane was charged with soliciting 2 men to murder his wife Philomena. It was revealed that he had approached 2 men, Christopher Berger and Michael Doyle, 2 men from Dublin. Gardaí objected to bail as they were concerned that they may interfere with witnesses. They were remanded to Mountjoy Prison. Kevin Gillane was denied bail as there were fears that he would try and kill Martin Gordon, one of Philomena's brothers. On July 10th, the 2 Gillane brothers appeared at the High Court in Dublin to appeal for bail. Again, the Gardaí objected to bail being granted, as Kevin Gillane had threatened to kill one of the Gardaí in relation to the incident at Pat Gillane's house in June, and they feared that Pat Gillane would interfere with witnesses that were due to speak against him when his trial took place. He also had threatened an investigating detective, gone to his house and caused duress to the family. Pat and his brother Kevin had also assaulted and threatened other members of the Garda force. Gardaí also stated that Pat admitted to strangling his wife Philomena on 2 occasions before her death, once at Christmas in 1993, when he arrived home drunk and aggressive. He told his wife of the affair with her sister, which led to a massive fight between the two sisters. A few days later, Philomena walked into a pub where Bridie worked and hit her husband, Pat, when he refused to go home. She threatened to take him for every penny he had. The day before Christmas Eve, Pat admitted himself to St. Bridget's Psychiatric Hospital in Ballinasloe for treatment after trying to strangle Philomena. He would do the same again in February 1994 at their new house in Gort, and also admit himself to St. Bridget's Psychiatric Hospital again. I think he was setting himself up for diminished responsibility if he was to be charged with anything that was to happen to Philomena in the future. When it came to the bail decision, it was granted for Pat first. The judge said the Gardaí did not name the witnesses that Pat may interfere with or bring the witnesses forward to give statements to the effect, so bail was granted. As for Kevin Gillane, he was also granted bail as his attack was reactionary against the Gardaí and the Gordons. They both had to pay £10,000 each from independent sureties and £2,000 each themselves, which was duly paid. 2 weeks later, both brothers were granted free legal aid. It was refused initially due to the amount of land both brothers owned. Kevin was first to be tried for the assault on the Gordons. It was a bit of a mess and emotions were high. Without going into detail, the trial was declared a mistrial. Kevin was then summoned to a second trial, and he was found not guilty to causing harm to Philomena's brother on the day of the incident at Pat Gillane's house. Next up was Pat Gillane. He was on trial for the solicitation of 2 men to kill his wife. This trial took place on the 24th of September 1996 in the Galway Criminal Circuit Court. Pat pleaded not guilty. As the jury filed in, Philomena's mother collapsed and died of a heart attack there and then. The trial did not continue and it was put off until a future date. Noni was buried on the 27th of September at her home place at Kaltra, County Galway. In October 1996, an application was granted to have the trial venue moved to the Dublin Criminal Court, and this was granted because of the rumours and media interest over the case. On December 1st, 1997, Pat Gillane would finally appear in court to face charges. This would be the first time in the history of this state where someone would face trial for the solicitation of murder. The defence reminded the jury that this was not a murder trial, and though everyone was aware of what happened to Philomena, they were to put it out of their heads. The question before them was, had Pat Gillane asked 2 men to murder his wife? Bridie Gordon would take to the stand on the second day of the trial, and she spoke about her affair with Pat Gillane. She said she was not into the relationship as much as Pat was, and he would constantly pester her to go places with him and be intimate. She also said the relationship ended in October 1993, when she had met someone else. She also spoke about the fight she had with Philomena on the night Pat told her about the affair, and while they both fought, Pat just sat back and watched, saying nothing. Next on the stand was one of the men who accused Pat Gillane of asking to murder Philomena, Christopher Bulger. He said on the last Sunday of January 1994, he was with his brother and 2 friends walking down a street in Dublin when a car pulled up and the driver was Pat Gillane. He said hello and pulled up further down the road. He asked would they be interested in a job he needed doing, but didn't say what it was. Then Gillane bought them cigarettes and drove them to the Basin Lane flats. There, Gillane asked Bulger and Doyle to kill a woman that worked at a hospital. He said there was a large sum of money in it for them if they agreed. Gillane did not give details of where and when this was to happen. The two men said no and left the flat. Bulger would spend the next 6 months in prison for unrelated charges, and when he got out, Doyle told him that he had seen Pat Gillane on the TV and that his wife had been murdered. Bulger went to the local Garda station and informed them of what had happened with Pat Gillane that previous January. On the 4th of December, Gardaí read out Pat Gillane's statement given when questioned about the death of his wife. He spoke terribly of Philomena and said how she threatened to take everything he had after he told her about the affair. He spoke fondly of Bridie and how he loved being with her. He said Bridie had asked him to leave her sister and set up home with her, and she had given out to him before the wedding and on the day of it. He said after the wedding, Bridie continued to pester him. Bridie also told Gillane that she didn't like Philomena in the home, as she was too bossy and interfered with their lives. Gillane did admit that he was in Dublin that Sunday, that the two men claimed to meeting him, but said he never met them, and that these two were only winos who would say anything for a drink. Michael Doyle was the next to take the stand, and he confirmed everything Bulger had already said. When asked why Gillane said he wanted this woman killed, he said, "She has threatened to take everything I have." This is where the prosecution rested their case. The next day, Gillane took to the witness stand and admitted he was having an affair with Bridie behind his wife's back. He denied that he fancied Bridie more than his wife, and that he told Bridie that the relationship couldn't continue. He said he told Philomena of the affair because he felt guilty, and that he was desperate to leave the Gordon house. Even though the affair was over, he was afraid it would start up again with them, all living under the same roof. But Philomena wouldn't leave. She said her mother would never agree to it. This to me makes no sense. Why would Philomena want to continue to stay in a house with her sister and her husband who had an affair? If it was me, I'd want to move to the new house, even if it didn't have a roof. Not sure I'd be bringing the husband though. Gillane admitted to being in Dublin that last Sunday of January 1994, but said he was not in the area mentioned by Bulger and Doyle, including Basin Lane, and denied asking them to kill his wife. Gillane said he had been put under fierce surveillance for the 12 months after his wife was murdered, and he had been put under a lot of pressure during Garda interviews, and they had put words into his mouth. He was asked why he referred to the two men as winos, if he didn't know them. He said that his solicitor had informed him that they were from a lower class and were fond of a drink. After 5 days, the defence rested with their only witness, which was Gillane himself, and court adjourned for the weekend. The following Monday, closing speeches were heard by the defence and prosecution, and the jury were reminded by the defence once again that this was not a murder trial. It was obvious that Mr. Bulger and Mr. Doyle had not carried out the murder, but what was in question was whether Gillane had asked them to do this. The defence also stated that the case against his client was based solely on eyewitnesses, and they were not reliable eyewitnesses, as Bulger claimed he had a chip in his head and that people could read his thoughts. He also had over 40 convictions and spent time in the Central Mental Hospital on a dozen occasions. That afternoon, the jury returned with their verdict after around 90 minutes of deliberation, and they found Gillane guilty of solicitation to murder his wife Philomena. The following week, he was sentenced to 8 years, and Gillane sobbed. He was then brought to Mountjoy Prison. He put in an appeal in February 1998 to have his conviction and sentence overturned. This was heard in November 1998, but by December the judges came back with their decision and it was dismissed. In 1999, Philomena's case was to get a new lease of life, and the case was to be re-investigated, but there has been no further arrests or new information released. In June 2003, Gillane was granted temporary day release from Whitfield Prison to work as a builder on a community centre project. In December of that same year, he would spend his first Christmas at home after being granted permission to go home to spend time with his son, who was now 9 years old. The people of Gort were split in their opinion of the case. After his release, after serving 6 years out of the 8, Gillane set up his own haulage firm with his brother Kevin. In 2019, the company went into liquidation. Bridie Gordon still calls for justice for her sister, and the file still remains open to this day. A single fingerprint was found on the rearview mirror. No match has ever been found, and also no weapons have ever been found. I think the final word should be for Philomena, and the betrayal that she suffered before her death, and the fact no one has been brought to justice over her murder. She was betrayed by her sister in the worst way possible, and by her mother, who said she knew what was going on under her roof. To me, neither showed loyalty. Yes, her husband had the affair, but if you can't trust family, who can you trust? I do think Gillane succeeded in getting someone to kill her. Philomena did put up a fight, so I'd imagine she would have left marks on Gillane if it had been him. Plus, judging from what I know about him, he wouldn't have the balls to do it. But what I did find strange, Philomena was wearing her nightdress under her clothes. While it may be common practice to throw on a coat over your night clothes to do a school run when late, I don't think you would do this to take a trip to Dublin to work. Philomena seemed like a very organised person, with a head on her shoulders, who fought tooth and nail to save her own life, and the life of her baby, and not to leave her son grow up without a mother. This is an extremely sad case, and I feel the people that were in her life have a lot to answer for. We are definitely left with more questions than answers.